Well, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, has been one of my greatest influences when she was alive, and now that she's not alive, that she's in a little soul like form, I feel I channel her all the time, and she's greatly influences me. So my grandmother was a wonderful woman with a great inner strength. She was married in a very traditional manner, an arranged marriage in India. Never really liked my grandfather, but she lived with him. But she had a great sense of humor. So whenever there was any fight or issues, she would immediately turn it into a little humorous anecdote. And then she'd get very busy with her life. And she always believed in women and very forward thinking. She always thought that taboos were all man made and not God made. And so she immediately changed the way I looked at things from when I was very young. So my grandmother, she was very active, very animated. And my last work, called Stories by Hand, the first story I started to speak of was her story. And that's the way all the stories came into being. And the piece itself is an autobiographical piece. It's all stories in different aspects of my life, but it all is channeled through her life, her way of seeing life, and how it's sort of sourced through me at this point. And even now, as I keep getting older, I keep thinking that I'm becoming her. Even my mother jokes that way, saying, you're becoming your grandmother. So she was a great cook, and she taught me how to cook. And because of her, I absolutely love cooking. And I don't follow any recipes. I read it and I toss it and, sort of create my own. And I think that has really changed the way I choreograph in a sort of sensual way, looking at the essences, the visceral connections, rather than looking at measure by measure. She would say, look at the color, smell it, enough. Is it boiling enough? You'd know. And while at the same time you had to clean the kitchen. So, so it came to be that it really influenced a very young choreographer in me in those days, and gets deeper and deeper into my being as I keep dwelling into that field. I think of myself as a choreographing performer. If there's a better connection there, I try to find the word. But I'm still a very active performer. But I think I get the greatest joy when I choreograph. So maybe I'm more inclined to say I am a choreographer. And I love seeing how other bodies are sculpted. And it's not just the way I move, and I have these ideas, and then there are these bodies just like clay, and then they have their own life. And they just inspire incredibly. Well, I think when I'm performing on stage, I feel myself. I wonder if that's how, the fetus feels in the womb, or is that how a spaceman feels in the space? It's just, an abandon of time. And you feel very large and very small all at once. You feel suspended. And you feel incredibly in charge and incredibly vulnerable all at once. It's all the opposites put together, and it really becomes the self to me. It becomes more. That's exactly what we're supposed to be feeling, without all the masks and without really thinking about the construction of sentences and how the words might affect others. You just feel, well, this is what we are made of. And the communication is all the way from inside to outside. What is important about dance or movement? I think I would go back in time and I would think about storytelling. When I was growing up, all that we would be surrounded by would be stories, all mythological stories told at home, stories when you're a child, you're not eating, and you have a grand aunt sitting with you because your mother's too busy, and she tries to coax you to eat your food. And the only way to do that is to tell these fabulous stories where you have to imagine all kinds of beings and creatures. And you don't hear the end of the story until you finish your food. So I think that sort of inspires me a lot to understand what drama is, because I think as human beings, we are drama. Drama is a combination of music, movement, and theatre. Storytelling, really. And I think it's like a tapestry. So without that, we wouldn't exist. And for me, dance is a very essential aspect of it, because we just move. dance from different cultures. Like I'm from India, it has a particular phraseology, but so does ballet or so does flamenco. But if you remove those kind of definitions, we all move. If I were to get up and walk, I still move. And to me, that's the beginning of dance. And I think as long as we connect with that and don't see it as a part, as I have to be a professional and therefore a dancer, I feel we'll be all right. And I think that then we have a confidence and an empathy towards each other. We become curious about each other to know who I am and who you are. That allows us to form a much stronger human connection, and beyond the human, a more universal sort of understanding of even why we are here. So I started to dance when I was 5, and I started to perform professionally when I was about 14 or 15. And my classical dance, called Bharatanatyam from southern India, is a very rigid, highly codified form. So we would always listen to our teacher, and whatever he said, we would do. But very early on, I noticed that he would pull me out of the group and make me sit down, and then put me back in again later, but would modify my movements. Instead of a short leg bend, it would be a long one, or the turn would be different, or a pose would be different. And I'd often wonder why. And then he said that it's because he looked at my body, which was different from the others, and therefore what they did not suit me, and I looked awkward. So I thought, all right, he's sort of patching me up, but actually it gave me freedom in my own movement, and I think that was really the beginning of how I started seeing what eventually I came to know as choreography. How you look at the body differently and where it is in the space and modify certain things. So outside of my school, I used to do classical Indian dance, but within my school, I used to do a lot of what they call Western dance, doing little Broadway shows, things like that. And I really enjoyed that. I was very inspired by Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, because that's all the access I had in India at that time. And all I wanted to do was tap dance. I did not want to do Indian dance. So I would look at the tap dancing and I would try to imitate them and try to see how I could put that into my Indian dance, but make it Indian. So I think by and by, I sort of got into trying out various small things here and there. And I think my first break really came in '94 when for my teacher's dance academy, they were turning 25 years. They were celebrating their 25th year. We decided to mount a big surprise production, and I became sort of like the main choreographer, and we had the whole school involved. And it was an allegorical play called The Kingdom of Cards. And that was my first foray into choreography of actually not just the bodies, but design in space. So I started seeing the bodies as like how an architect might, as modules and what you do, but it's a moving space. And that really, really sort of brought me into that world of choreography. That would be my first way of entering it. But around that time, I also was introduced to American modern dance, the Limon technique, the Hania Home technique. The idea of touch was alien to me. If somebody touched me, we would sort of like, go away and say, why are you touching me? Because that's not there in my form. The idea of falling was different. We never fell. So those were new tools. And that was, I started to incorporate those kind of elements into my own dancing and creating little nuggets of my own work. So that slowly led into the world of choreography for me. But I was very actively dancing as well. So in a way, I was rediscovering my own body from the inside. If there was a particular way of moving, all of a sudden with these new elements, the internal way of moving shifted and changed. So the outer expression changed as well. So that gave me a lot of insight into what this whole world called choreography does. Then I went to Japan and I learned Japanese dance, and that completely blew my mind away. It couldn't be more different than my own dance. And then after learning that, I had to come back to my own dance. So it was quite unusual for me to get into that. And I felt really like an outsider looking at my own form, having learnt it for years and years. Well, for each of my works, I come with a sort of a skeletal framework, an idea. Initially, I would have it all planned out and laid out, but it never really worked because, that's when you're just beginning this whole world of choreography. Then I started loosening up a bit, and I would have an idea, and I'd just say, let's workshop it. And I'd throw the idea out, and then almost immediately I'd see that what the dancers do would be so different compared to what I would envision. And then my role then would be to guide or to edit, or to initially maybe lead them through a workshop movement process, so they had access to a particular kind of movement. And I found that working with contemporary dancers was far easier than working with Indian classical dancers, because contemporary dancers are cross-trained, and they're able, like a very well-oiled machine, they're able to immediately adapt and put that in and not make it look superficial. So then my next step actually was not just the bodies moving, but the inner narrative. Because I think that's what I find changes the piece. Because if they're just moving without intention, then they're beautiful movers, and then what? But if they're moving and then you as a choreographer or a director have the capability of drawing an inner narrative of what they're doing, then I think the piece becomes very powerful, and then you're almost controlling time. And to me, that space and time dimension becomes very important when the body's in conversation with them. And the narrative doesn't have to be mine. And the narrative doesn't have to do anything with the theme of the project, but at that very moment, what they do, I find that the more abstract it is and the more connected it is to them, then the closer it comes to the actual theme of the project. Yeah, it happens. It happens about 8 out of 10 times, which I think is a good number.
Them's good odds.
Yeah. It also is very exciting when I'm in it with others, because there's a sense of camaraderie, but there's a sense of competitiveness as well, which I think is very important. There's a little bit of a sort of, I need to win the race too, or you're testing your own body, you're sort of growing older body against younger bodies. And the difference in the quality, in what you can do with the group, that is very key, I think, in charging a piece, because then the vulnerability comes in. And I think vulnerability is the honesty of the piece. And when I don't perform, I just have a blast. I sit out and just look at the whole map sort of shift all the time, which is just absolutely great.
It's wonderful. It's so great you're laughing about it too.
Well, I think I'd first start telling Mr. Alien, I'd start speaking to the alien in my own language, which is Tamil, which probably the alien would not know. And I think secondly, I would say that why it is very important to take my work is it's just not me. It's my grandmother. And those kind of stories never come from just the person you meet. It's all the different people that make you. And I think it's a very key aspect of what we humans are, is that we're just not one person that you see. We're just a complete combination of all the different people you meet. And we're just this being stuck together and stitched together. And all the things we say are actually multiple voices and not just one voice. So I think if you take one person's work, you're actually taking a million other people's voices with you. Motherhood has surprised me about my art form. I think I thought I knew myself quite well until I became a mother. And then it was like seeing a mirror. And the person I saw in the mirror was somebody I really didn't know that well. And I had to really investigate that person again. And to look into my own daughter's eyes was a bit frightening at times, because she was like the strongest mirror. She still continues to be. But in the earlier years, that would probably be a guide it really affected my pieces and informed my pieces I created from when I became a mother. And the sad part of it is, I think I wouldn't call it sad. I think I would call it melancholic. I think melancholy is more poetic. And I think to do what I do, that is dance or choreography or my creative aspect or releasing the person I am, there is a melancholy inside that I feel can only be channeled through what I do here. Because when it comes out, it's like in verse form. It does not have to justify itself, but it's just placed in front of you, and then you can just leave it and go away and just let it live its own melancholy, so to say. So it's and that melancholy carries a great silence, a very pregnant silence, and I think it could contain the emotion of sadness in it, but I just think it's far more complex than that. And I think without that, I don't know if I would exist or the work would.